So Jesus walks into a bar. Sounds like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it? It's not a joke, it's our gospel lesson today. The disciples were in this upper room, place where food was brought to them. This is a bar. This is a place or an eating establishment. Again, sounds like the beginning of a joke. And Jesus walks through the door and he says, "Peace be with you." Again, I assure you, this is not a joke. In fact, to the disciples, they would not have thought this a joke for sure. There's a little piece of me that wonders if Jesus would have found this moment funny. Because there Jesus is, walking basically into the room, and it says the doors were locked. So you get this picture of him sort of walking through the wall to be among them. And there he is like, "Surprise! Peace be with you!" It would have terrified them. I wonder if he thought it was funny. But he says peace. So what is peace? Is it the absence of war? Well, not really, because that doesn't seem to make sense here. Maybe the war of being. Rather, I think that peace is the state of being through which God operates. It's the presence, it's the fullness of God. It's being immersed in the fullness of truth and immersed in his love. In the beginning, we see God speaking out into the darkness. If any time was peace, this is it. You have God. That's it. And he speaks out into the darkness and he creates. So we know in peace that creation comes. And then after this moment of sheer creation and wonder, then we start to see chaos enter the world. Whether it's through humanity, the fall of humanity, or whether it's through the fall of Satan and the angels, chaos comes into the world. It's like a flood. So when Jesus walks into this upper room and he says, "Peace be with you," he's impressing peace on his disciples. He's speaking against the current world order, the current way of being that's in their hearts, that's in the world around them. He's speaking against this chaos. He's saying, "Peace be with you. Be like me. Be in me. Be at peace." He's saying, live in a world in which I am the center, rather than that which the world is the center. He shows them his hands and his side. He gives them living proof. He gives them truth. The contradictory information of their senses, the state of chaos they were in, has now been solved. He has, in fact, risen from the grave. These words that were spoken to them by these women weren't just lies or half-truths or gossip or hysterical missightings, but they were something more. They were truth. And so now, because of this new information, reality has been redefined for them. And then, of course, Thomas comes along. I feel really bad for Thomas. Thomas comes along at just the wrong time. Surely when he goes into this room, there are the disciples overjoyed. They're probably still giggling and laughing with each other. You remember Jesus came and I put my finger in his hand. They were probably still having this great time. And there's Thomas who's missed it. And so Thomas says to the disciples, "I don't believe you." Why? Because I think it's quite fair. He's saying, look, I'm known since I was a child. Dead people don't climb out of the grave. That's truth. And so to us, we can understand that. It would be like me saying something else to you. Okay, I have a question for you. What color is the sun? Yellow, right? Nod, shake your head. Yeah. Okay, most of you are shaking your head. Okay. Well, that's what we've been taught since we were a kid. But what if I told you this was the color of the sun? Jim, can you help me here? Okay, apparently not right now. It's not black. There we go. What if I told you this was the color of the sun? Right? You'd be like, Or what about this? Next one. Or this. Right? These are actually the color of the sun. Astronauts have gone out into outer space. Some of them have said they looked at the sun and the sun was blue. Some of them said they saw a purple tinge to it. Well, the reason, of course, is because the sun isn't and is all of these colors. It is yellow, it is green, it is blue, it is purple. In fact, the largest light wavelength that we receive from the sun is actually green. So can you go back to that first picture? Of the sun, the green one. There you go. That is actually the sun. It's crazy. But when in outer space, you would actually see the sun. If you're not seeing twinges of light, you're seeing the sun, it's just white. Because it's all color coming to you. But when we're kids, we draw it as yellow. I still draw it as yellow. I don't get to a blank page, a white page and draw the sky blue and leave the sun white. In Japan, in contrast, of course, they when they draw the sun, they draw it red. Because it's what we're taught. It's what we know. So Thomas, going into this place, he knew that dead people don't climb out of the graves. If they do, they look more kind of like this. This is a dead person climbing out of a grave. Or like this. Yeah, disgusting. Hollywood magic, eh? Wow. That's what dead people look like when they climb out of graves. But that wasn't Jesus. Rather, Jesus was perfect. So Thomas kind of gets this bad rap as doubting when he's just believing what he's always been taught to be true. But then Jesus comes in and he confronts this situation that Thomas is in. This world in which Thomas is living, where that zombie and those sons, that was the truth. And Jesus brings this new truth. And of course, he says, Thomas, touch my hands, put your hand in my side, this is truth. And so this world of chaos that Thomas had been living in is now suddenly cleaned up. It's now cleared. Thomas, I'd like to point out, ends up going further than any of the other disciples do in distance, and ends up possibly, and according to church historians, possibly bringing more people to the Lord than anyone else. He gets a bad rap for his doubting there. He does, after he has this experience with God. But when I hear Jesus say to Thomas, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. That's Jesus saying, Thomas, good, I'm glad you believe, but blessed are still those who have not seen and yet have believed. I hear this verse and I'd like to say, I immediately am filled with, thoughts about Thomas, but I'm really not. I heard once that the Bible is a hyperlinked book. If you're familiar with computers, you know that a hyperlink is something on a screen you push and it jumps to another section of a document or another file. And somebody once showed this picture and said, this is the Bible. Those white lines underneath are actually all the different chapters of the Bible and how long the chapters are. And those colors are actually the connections of verses from one part of the Bible to another. Somebody went along and did this. I think it's fascinating. Beautiful. So there are verses throughout the entire Bible that reference and connect to verses in every other part. And so when I hear Jesus say this, blessed, to Thomas, my mind actually immediately jumps to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' greatest sermon. So what does Jesus mean by blessed? He means this. He means what he's talking about in this time. And Jesus goes on in the Sermon on the Mount and he says, blessed are the fill in the blank. If you liked Monty Python, it was blessed are the cheesemakers. Naturally, he doesn't mean just cheesemakers, but every manufacturer of dairy products. But Jesus really, though, when he does his Sermon on the Mount, he's laying out the story of God's call to us. This is what it means to live the perfect life. This is the life that I'm calling you to live. The life that is the life of peace, dwelling in peace, rather than in contrast, a life that's living in contradiction to the world, in contradiction to creation, a world in chaos, a life in chaos. So Jesus, when he's saying, blessed are the, he's showing us the roadmap. He's showing us the way to live. So when he's saying that to Thomas, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed, he's saying you don't have to have seen me in order to live this life. You can. The disciples are sent out by Jesus now as apostles. And we see the consequences of their life in the book of Acts. So now we jump to the book of Acts today. The full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul. And no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. The earliest followers of Christ, believed with their entirety. They lived in a world in which believing was a capital punishment. They would die. These people were beaten for their faith and they were hurt. So no one joined half-heartedly. They gave their all to their belief. And in giving their all, they didn't just give their heart. In Jewish culture, there was no divorce between your head and your heart, between your actions of your body and what you were believing. Everything was one. It was all part of it. They were much more holistic people than we were. So an action of the body was an action of worship, just as much as thinking it was. And then thinking it was also an act of worship. Jesus kind of points to this. When he talks about, he says, you have heard it said, people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister is subject to judgment. He also says, you've heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus is saying that if you think about these things, he doesn't just mean like thoughts that flit through your head, but it's the meditation, the things that you dwell on, the things that you fantasize about, the things that you think over and over again, that you give room and board to. These thoughts, these are acts of living. And so they are either acts of worship or they are acts that draw you away from God. To Jewish believers, they shared their whole being with each other because it was all an act of worship. Nobody said, I love you with my heart, and then did nothing about it. That'd be one horrible romantic relationship, wouldn't it? So it'd be like, I love you with all of my heart, and that's it. No, that'd be a horrible one. Equally, if you had a child, and you came to your child and you said, child, take out the garbage, please. I'm going out right now. I'd like it taken out by the time I get back. And you come, and your child says to you, I love you with all my heart. I will take out the garbage in my heart. And you go and you come back and the garbage isn't taken out. And the child says, I love you, I just forgot. But I took it out in my heart. That help? No! Likewise, if you have a child and you say, take out the garbage, I'm going out, and the child says, no, I'm not taking out that garbage. Get it. And then you go out. And then you come back and the garbage is taken out. You're like, he did what he wanted. He did what I asked. Like, you have no complaint. It was an act of worship. It was thanks.
He paid the neighbor.
He paid the neighbor. Hey, it still got out. But the job got done. And so to the Jewish mind, they don't want equally. They wouldn't want that disagreement from the child in the first place. They want holistic worship. And that's what Jesus wants from all of us, is a holistic belief and faith in Him, us giving our whole selves to Him. And in the early church, they did that by sharing everything they had with each other to take care of each other's needs. This wasn't a call to communism as we understand it today, certainly not. Rather, the disciples still believed in private property, as Paul talks about later and says, if anyone doesn't work, he doesn't eat. But rather, It is a statement about the overpouring or the outpouring of generosity to each other. The absolute just giving of themselves to each other in Christ. That was the living of the Christian community, the walking in Jesus. The Bible goes on and says, and with great power the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord, and great grace was upon them all. This same Spirit that brought the believers together in the first place, the same Spirit that encouraged them and empowered them to give towards each other, to trust that God would provide for their needs, despite the fact that they were giving out so much. That same Spirit came upon them and gave them power. Now, to some psychologists, they look at verses like this about community, and they think that power had something to do with, in community you feel stronger, right? In poorer communities, to feel more powerful and not living just in this world of chaos, in this world of being downtrodden, in this world of being poor and powerless, they join gangs to feel more power, right? Well, the Christian community wasn't that. The power didn't come from just feeling a sense of community, but rather because God is also an actor in this. God is an actor in the world. And God brought his peace and his life in order that more life could be created through us. The Roman sense of peace is something contrary, though. The Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, was very, very important value to the Roman Empire. In fact, so much so that if you were lived in Rome, or the Roman Empire, most chances are you weren't a Roman citizen. But if you were lucky enough to be called a Roman citizen, to have citizenship, you could walk from one empire to the side of the empire to the other without fear of being obstructed, molested, bothered by people. And they did this simply with two words, Citus Romanus, they would say, or I am a Roman citizen. And if you were a Roman citizen and said those words, you were safe. Because such was the assurance to the people of the time that if you weren't, if you bothered that person, if you hurt that person, that now you were going to have to face the entirety of the Roman Empire. They would come down upon you, destroy your house, kill you and your entire family. Just to prove the point, nobody messes with the Roman peace. Jesus and our peace is different than that. And yet, God is there. God does say something to us about his certainty. Jesus actually says, if anyone causes one of these little ones to sin, it would be better if a millstone would be tied around their neck and they were tossed into the sea. That's pretty harsh. God is there with us. More certainly than the Pax Romana to defend you to defend them is God to defend us. But of course, the difference is the Pax Romana was entirely concerned about your earthly well-being. Well, that's not Christ's. For Christ sees the larger picture, the larger of God's call to all of us. And so that's what he's protecting us from. And that's what he's focused on us. The next part of this wasn't just about power that God brought to the people, although he did. It was about grace and God's unmerited gift. God isn't passive, I said. He's active. He is an active force in this story. And he's not just an active force in this story, but in all stories in the Bible. As we talked about our hyperlinked text there, God brings power to many different times, acts at many different times in the Bible. He says to the people, if you will, then I will, as he calls them out and sends them out. To Abraham in the book of Genesis, he says, if you will leave your father's household and you will go to the land I'm showing you, I will make your descendants outnumber the stars in the heavens. The yellow ones, blue ones, green ones, purple ones. At least I think he would have said that. Also, he says to Moses, if you follow me and you do what I tell you, then you will lead the people into the promised land. He says to David, if you follow my commands and you love me with all your heart, soul, and mind, then you will never fail to have someone sit on the throne. Your lineage will last forever. And this is what God says. But he always says, if you do this, then I will do this, when he talks to them. And the reason is he wants the people to step out. He wants the people to act and to move. He wants them to be part of his creation story. This is the call, or the sending out, is the same as to the apostles. They are sent out into the world. And consequently, in the early Christian church, it says there was not a needy person among them, for as many as they were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as had need. And again, this isn't encouraging or stating that we should have a welfare system in which people can do nothing and sit down and do nothing. Paul already kind of contradicted that. But it's as had need in their call to walk out the gospel themselves. And that's what they did. And God blessed them, the community, for it. And he didn't just bless them to make them happy, but he blessed them in such a way as they were then a symbol and a marker to the rest of the people around them. And this is how it comes back to you and to I. God's presence in our community, and as we step out in the way of Christ and walking in his love, we create a world that is contrary to the world outside. It shows and lives a different way of being than the rest of the world sees or understands. And they don't get it. It puts them into a world, into a confusion, because they don't understand how people can be that joyous, that generous, that kind, that loving, that self-controlled, that faithful. How can people be that way? And that living will be contrary to their sense of being, to their values. And so they'll have one of two things. It'll put them into a state of chaos. And they'll have one of two ways of being from that sense. They can either then attack you, try and destroy you, because they don't like that, because they want to go back to that same old state of order and peace that they were living in, even though it was a half-hearted peace. Or they'll turn around and they'll join you. But they need to be confronted with it. And this is the call of the church today. The author of the Gospel of John recognizes that he is writing to people who weren't there. So Thomas in this story shows a bridge between those who weren't there and those who were. And he shows a roadmap that, look, Thomas went out and did these amazing things afterwards. You didn't have to be amongst the original group to do incredible things. You can believe. And those who were not there and didn't get a chance to stick their finger in his hand or put his hand in their side, they can still do incredible things, for blessed are they. We are naturally suspicious as the world, in our century, in our society, of people who talk about the message of the empty tomb if we haven't had an experience with Christ. Why? Because rising from the dead goes against everything we understand and know. People don't just rise from the dead. They look like zombies if they do. But people can only come to believe in something new if their truth that they have, their order in life, is shaken. And they need proof, and that proof is us. It is the church, if we are living it. If we are living it holistically, if we are living out the generosity of the early church, if we are living out the kindness, the love, the faithfulness, then we are transforming society. We are confronting it. And yes, at times it will lash out against us, and at times we will win others over to us. But if we do nothing, if we don't live holistically, if we say, I believe in Jesus in my heart, and that's as far as it goes, then nothing more will happen. and nor will God's power be shown and manifest in our lives. The story of the gospel here today lets us sit at the end of it in one of two camps. You are either one among the believers, who then we see in the book of Acts what they go out to do, or two, we are those looking around asking for more proof. We are those looking around saying, I don't yet believe. I need something more. And in the case of saying, I want something more, that's fine. As long as when something more comes, then you act on it. But there are people who always say, I want more, I want more, I want more. They define themselves as seekers. I'm a seeker. And nothing ever enough is to answer that. Nothing is ever enough to answer that question of seeking. Don't be one of those. We are left today in either the camp of walking out and following in Christ holistically, or we are left in the camp of saying, I want something more. If you are saying you want something more, maybe you haven't had that great experience. Then ask God for it. Seek God. Continue to ask God for that. Because that's the most important thing. That encounter with Christ. And if you have, then I challenge you, I encourage you to walk out as the disciples did. Confront the world around you with this life that is so contrary, contrasting its own. So that they might be forced to look and to see the empty tomb. Might be forced to see the difference in the Christian community. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we are here, Lord, as we are before you, some of us might be wanting more evidence, more assurance that you are who you say you are. God, I pray for each of those people in this moment, and I pray that you would answer us. God, I pray that you would touch their lives, that you would be manifested in them. Lord God, that they would know who you are. And Lord, for all of those in this room now who have had that encounter with you, who have had their lives touched or changed, and they have seen you, then Lord, I pray that you would breathe your Holy Spirit into them. That you would breathe upon them and you would send them out. That they would see themselves no longer just as disciples, but as apostles. And Lord, that they would go out into this world to encounter this world, to bring your peace contrary to this world, so that people, Lord, might come to know you. We pray these things all in your name, Jesus.